All right, so what if I were to tell you that if you were to invest $100 with me right now, you could make 10 times this in 1 month? That's right, $100 to $1,000 in 1 month without you even having to lift a finger. Now, I'm sure many of you are wondering, how is this even possible? But, oh my God. I can't just tell you that, it's a secret of the trade, but don't worry, you guys can trust me. So, are you in or are you out? The offer isn't on the table for long. Well, I'm sure this may seem too good to be true to most of you. People fall into these get-rich-quick schemes all the time. An example of such a scheme is called the Ponzi Scheme. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard of Ponzi schemes, but might wonder how they work. Named after Charles Ponzi, who started the first well-known scheme of this type in the US, it actually is quite a simple layout. Basically, it works by the people running the scam recruiting people to invest money into something, which in reality is complete garbage. The scammers then create a lie for how these big profits are being made and perpetuate this lie by occasionally paying out money to some of the older investors, with some of the money received from newer investors, thus perpetuating the idea that money is actually being made and that these people should continue to invest. However, they start to run into problems when the scheme becomes too large and they run out of newer investors, or if multiple older investors want to pull out at the same time. So a prime example of this started back in 2006 and was called AdSurf Daily. Basically, it worked by having you buy fictional ad units which were watched by other members. Basically, by watching other people's ad units, you could theoretically get up to 150% of your money back, and at the end of the day, the profits were split between everybody based on how many ad units that you had. So in theory, the more ad units you bought, plus the more ad units you watched, equals more money for you. In reality, the little bit of money that you were seeing was actually coming from new people buying ad units. And of course, this whole thing was unsustainable and was shut down by the US government in 2008. Now, intuitively, you'd think that once people realized that they had been scammed, they would be outraged at the scammers. However, we find that this isn't always what happens. The weirdest part of the downfall of AdSurf Daily was actually that once the whole thing was shut down, people started banding together in places like internet forums and actually sympathized with the scammers. In their mind, it wasn't that their money had been stolen. It was that the government shut down the whole thing because it was out to get them and it didn't want them to get ahead. Or the government had made a mistake and they were too embarrassed to admit it. It actually went as far as 2 men who were scammed actually suing the US government for shutting down the operation using a variety of bizarre arguments. People often don't want to believe that something like being scammed could happen to someone as smart and savvy as themselves. So what's happening here? Why are these people acting so irrationally? What they're experiencing is actually the phenomenon of cognitive dissonance. This is that feeling that you get when you have 2 conflicting thoughts, like wanting that last piece of cake but knowing that your waistline really doesn't need it. Or when your behavior conflicts with your beliefs, like stealing office supplies from your day job despite knowing that stealing is wrong. Now, I'm sure right now many of you are thinking about a time where you've had this feeling. You know, that kind of uncomfortable feeling in the pit of your stomach when something just doesn't feel right. Some of you might decide to not have that last piece of cake. After all, you really need to lose those last 3 pounds. But hey, you don't make enough of your office job anyways. What's a little extra office supplies, right? So there's multiple ways that we can sort of deal with this cognitive dissonance. So taking our office supplies example, there's 2 paths that we can choose. We can either change or we can deal with it. The change aspect involves either changing our beliefs, like deciding to believe that maybe stealing isn't really that bad, or changing our actions, like deciding to not steal anymore and maybe giving the office supplies back. The change aspect allows us to remove the dissonance directly, thus alleviating it. The deal path, however, doesn't directly move the dissonance, but instead gives us mechanisms to, well, deal with it. This includes things like avoiding or ignoring the dissonant thoughts, such as pushing that nagging voice telling you that stealing's wrong down into the depths of your brain. Rationalizing, which is basically making up excuses, like telling yourself that I don't make enough, I deserve to take home office supplies from this job. Or accepting, like deciding, accepting, which is realizing that stealing is wrong and that you shouldn't be doing it, but accepting that it happened and moving on with your life. So the reason that fraud keeps happening and that Ponzi schemes keep working has to do with this deal aspect of dissonance. When someone tells us something that seems too good to be true, like that you can quadruple your money in 6 months without doing anything, it makes you feel uncomfortable. Now, I'm sure at this point, many of you would be thinking, it shouldn't be this easy to make money. And it makes you kind of think that maybe there's something wrong here. However, there's another part of you that's thinking, I love money, as money is what makes the world go round. As you can see, these are two conflicting thoughts leading to, you guessed it, cognitive dissonance. So what happens? Often people take the avoid, ignore route and turn a blind eye. This may seem shady and illegal, but I don't want to deal with it because I'm making bank. And when the whole thing crumbles, people take the rationalization route. It's a mistake, or the government's out to get me. This rationalization process is actually quite dangerous, as it can allow the scammer to come back, and it can allow for something called reloading, which is the phenomenon of a scammer shooting a victim only for the victim to not run away and come crawling back, allowing the scammer to reload and shoot them all over again. So the next time someone tells you something that seems too good to be true, take a step back and think about it. After all, as a very smart lady named Helen Keller once said, people don't like to think. If one thinks, one must reach conclusions. Conclusions are not always pleasant. After all, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Thank you.